Poor introduction, but it is what it is tonight.
Oh, no worries. Thank you. So it's like an echo. I can talk. I can talk without it if it's easier.
Yeah.
You want me to talk without it?
I'm told you have to use it. So I've turned on the echo. Let's give it another shot.
How about now?
That's good.
That's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can testify that you used it.
All right. Perfect. There you go. I get to check it off that I used it. So my name is Sanjay Narayan. Thank you all for having me here today. I grew up in Plano. I guess I'll introduce myself then. I grew up in Plano, founded the Republican Club at Plano West, went to Duke for undergrad, worked for Senator Cornyn on the Hill while I was there, went to Penn for law school, was active with Federalist Society, worked in New York as an attorney on Governor Christie's finance and policy teams in 2016. Moved back here in 2017. Governor Abbott appointed me to the Texas Radiation Advisory Board, which oversees the use of radiation in the state, including for medical, veterinary, doctor, but also for research purposes and our power plants, and have been active politically with various GOP causes. I'm also on the board of a national 501c3 called Color Us United, which advocates for a colorblind meritocracy, not just in education, but also in hiring. Chris Rufo and Kenny Shore are fellow board members. So the topic, as you mentioned, for me today that Julie and Olivia asked me to talk about is central bank digital currencies. So anytime you open up the news today, you're certain to be inundated with negative news about inflation, out of control government spending and regulation, our involvement in foreign conflicts that have no cognizable connection to the American national interest, and an invasion across both our southern and northern borders by illegal immigrants, aided and abetted by one of the main political parties in this country. And it all raises obvious questions about the sanctity and safety and security of not just our country, but our economy and also of our money supply overall. The US dollar, the yen, the euro, and other fiat currencies for decades have formed the backbone of international commerce. And amongst all our peers, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency, meaning it's been held in reserve by virtually every central bank around the globe. It's used by multinational corporations to settle dollar-denominated debt and to make transactions. And it's used to transact in some of the world's most important commodities, namely gold and oil. And all of it comes down to a simple concept of trust. Trust that the United States has a stable political and economic system, and also trust that we will repay our debts and maintain the relative purchasing power of our currency. But with the development of new technologies like cryptocurrencies, many people have asked questions about what an alternative to the existing regime might look like. And so historically, how did we get to this point? Well, in ancient times, we used to use barter system. We would trade with whatever we had, rocks, stones, wood. Eventually, we graduated to the use of gold. And gold was useful not just because it's a shiny yellow metal, but because it has a use independent from its use as a currency, jewelry, industrial application, and the like. And eventually, when it became too cumbersome to lug around gold bars, people started using paper. And that paper was initially backed by gold. And that gave rise to the gold standard. And under the gold standard, the value of a country's currency was directly proportionate to the amount of gold that they held in reserve. And typically, that paper would be convertible into physical gold and vice versa at set exchange rates, which could change from time to time. So at the end of the gold standard here in the United States in 1971, it was $35 a troy ounce. The gold standard had a couple of advantages. It provided a relative degree of stability to international trade and helped to tamp down overall inflation. But one of the major drawbacks of the gold standard was that it prevented governments from acting dynamically to address economic challenges. So for instance, in the event of a recession, you typically want to increase liquidity. But the only way to do that with the gold standard is either to mine for more gold or to devalue the peg, both of which have inflationary and devaluation as consequences. And it's for those reasons that eventually led to the demise of the gold standard here in the United States in 1971. But the direct proximate cause of that was an explosion in government spending, driven mainly by LBJ's ruinous Great Society welfare programs, of which we're still dealing with the costs and consequences today, along with our failures and misadventures in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. And the result is that inflation and a devaluation of our currency appeared because of that explosion in spending. And people in a predictable rush to safety, not just here in the United States, but across the globe, wherever people held US dollars, they rushed to their local banks to exchange them for physical gold. It caused a run on the banks, so much so that eventually the government and the banks could no longer honor those conversion attempts. And it is at that point that Richard Nixon finally called a halt to the gold standard. And since that time in 1971, the US dollar and every other currency on earth is what's known as a fiat currency. That means it's not backed by any physical being. Instead, its value is determined by trading in international markets with some limited involvement from central banks. But what it really means in practicality is that the only reason the dollar bill in your wallet or in your purse is worth more than the paper that it's printed on is because the government says so, and because we collectively believe that to be the case. And so it is not an overstatement to say that trust is really the fundamental currency of a fiat currency. Because if and when that trust is ever broken, if it's lost, it's difficult, if not impossible, to regain it. And in the intervening time period, a tremendous amount of societal dislocation can occur. This happened throughout history, numerous times. You can think back to 1930s, Weimar era Germany. Inflation was so bad that people burned Deutschmark rather than burn actual firewood because it was cheaper and more effective to do so. And we all know the results of what happened at the end of that decade, not just in Germany, but across the continent and across the globe. In more recent time, it's happened in countries like Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Sri Lanka, which have seen 100, 200, even 1,000% level of annual inflation. And to a much lesser extent, of course, but to a much lesser extent, it has also happened here in the United States. From 2008 until 2022, the Federal Reserve kept interest rates artificially low, near 0%, for nearly a decade and a half. And that massive increase in the money supply led to an asset bubble, not just in housing prices, but also in stock valuations. But without any real parallel increase in the productive capacity of the economy that was broad-based. And so during this time period, if you were an asset owner, this was a tremendous period of wealth accumulation. But if you were working class, middle class, you were on fixed income, you were a wage earner, a renter, this is a period of relative stagnation. But it can't be said that this was for a lack of effort or a lack of government trying, because this exact same period overlapped with one of the largest peacetime periods, expansion of government spending in this country's history. It was bipartisan, by Republicans and Democrats have both been complicit in this effort. But when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came into office, they poured gasoline on the fire. In 2021, they passed a useless stimulus program. I say useless because by the third quarter of 2020, of Donald Trump's first administration, we had already recovered 2/3 of the job losses from the COVID lockdowns, and we were already well underway for a technical recovery. They later passed the, quote, Inflation Reduction Act, perhaps the most inaptly piece of legislation in the history of our republic. Yep. All it did was shovel billions of dollars for subsidies to produce wasteful, unreliable source of energy like wind, solar, provide billions in dollars of subsidies for the purchase of electric vehicles to people who already have the funds to do it. That's because that wasn't an economics deal, that was a Green New Deal in disguise. Here are the facts. In 2017, the federal government spent $4.5 trillion. That was already too much money, and we were running billions of dollars a year in annual deficits. Less than 6 years later, so just over a decade, in 2023, the federal government spent $6.8 trillion. That means we increased the national annual deficit by nearly 50%. We're now running deficits in the trillions of dollars. Our national debt of $30 trillion exceeds our annual GDP of $25 trillion for the first time in American history. And all of this spending, what did it get us? It was predicated on ludicrous theories like the left-wing idea of modern monetary theory, the idea that you can have endless increases in spending with no negative ramifications or impact to interest rates or to inflation. We've all seen the negative consequences of that policy played out in real life. But at the end of the day, we've been the guinea pigs of this failed policy experiment. Since 2020, real median household income in this country is flat to down. Real median wages are down. The average increase in wages has not kept up with the aggregate level of inflation. And today, set aside how dangerous the world has now been and how much more dangerous it is for Americans than even it was 2, 4, 10 years ago. By any objective metric, the average American today is worse off than the day Donald Trump left office. And so if that's the money supply that we have today, what does an alternative like digital currencies look like? Well, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different digital currencies. The two most prominent are Bitcoin and Ether. So Bitcoin was created in the late 2000s. There are 21 million total in total creation, and they're released slowly as people, or more specifically as computers, solve increasingly complicated math equations and algorithms. And all that a digital currency is it's really just a token that's stored on an online electronic distributed ledger. And that ledger, which is called the blockchain, is critical. It's the central nervous system of any digital currency, because what it does is it allows for peer-to-peer transactions by people who also own those coins, but it also allows other market participants, meaning other coin holders, to validate and verify every single transaction that occurs on that network. So it's the equivalent of if you took a $5 bill out of your wallet and out to the floor fell a CVS-style length receipt that told you every single time that particular bill had been spent, who spent it, where it was spent, and what it was spent on. So it's a tremendous amount of information. So what are the pros and cons of this technology? Well, proponents will say that digital currencies are just a form of digital gold. It's nothing different. That there's a benefit to decentralization. The fact that there's no central bank or private bank that's issuing them gives them a degree of freedom. There's also a benefit to anonymity, especially if you live in a repressive regime. This can provide you an alternative means of engaging in transactions. And then there's also a benefit to reducing overall transaction costs because of the ability to have peer-to-peer transactions. What are some of the drawbacks? Well, critics would say that this looks like another version of an electronic tulip craze or any other asset bubble throughout history, except here that it doesn't have anything physical backing it. There's also potentially a lack of regulation, critics would argue, that gives rise to money laundering or fraud allegations. And in fact, there have been a number of notable high-profile cryptocurrency exchange failures and criminal convictions, most notably FTX, which was run by Sam Bankman-Fried, who happened to be one of the largest donors to Joe Biden's political campaign in 2020. He was so brazen that he bragged to reporters that he would, quote, engage in woke shibboleths, his words, not mine, with regulators in order to curry favor with them, in order to get what he wanted. There's a flip side to anonymity also, which is that it makes it a favored tool of criminal gangs to engage in illicit activities on the dark web, and to engage in ransomware attacks against hospitals, municipalities, schools, and of course, recently against the city of Dallas. It's also volatile, like many other assets, but cryptocurrencies tend to be even more volatile in many cases. When it first was issued, Bitcoin was worth $5, $10, maybe $100 a coin. A couple of years ago, went up to $60,000 a coin, back down to $15,000. Now it's back in a range of $50,000 to $65,000 any given day. So that makes it a risky investment proposition. But it also hurts its broader uptake in the population as a unit of currency. And then finally, to the extent that too little regulation is a problem, too much regulation is also just as much of a problem, because it threatens to stamp out this nascent industry in the womb. And this is really being driven by the left. You have progressives like Pocahontas Warren, the current SEC chair Gary Gensler, that seem to be on a virtual jihad against these virtual currencies, labeling them as operating unregistered exchanges, selling unlicensed securities. And while those efforts have had some degree of success and also some failure, what seems to be clear is their motivation to stamp out private cryptocurrencies to clear the runway for a government-led alternative. And so my view is, I think the blockchain technology is tremendously revolutionary. The ability to track an asset through its entire life cycle from start to finish has application not just for digital currencies, but in other areas of life, accounting, tax payments, supply chain management, and all the like. And this isn't investment advice, but I'm an investor in cryptocurrencies. I think that they can play an important role in a well-diversified portfolio, but it does admittedly remain to be seen whether people will broadly accept them as a unit of currency. But whatever your view may be, if you think that this is the next pet rock, or you think it's the next best thing to a slice of bread, if you think it has value or you think it has none, that's your personal view, that's your own personal prerogative to make, and all of us can do our research and come to our own conclusions on that. What is a significantly more important basis is how governments would seek to use this technology to implement their own form of a digital currency or a central bank digital currency, a CBDC. So a CBDC would just be a digital currency that's issued but with the full faith and credit of the United States government. In effect, a digital dollar. So proponents would say that, well, this would just increase the efficiency of transactions. We're already moving towards a largely cashless society. Most people are very comfortable using debit and credit cards, packing up the reward points. I know I love to do it myself. And we're already moving in that direction. This would simply accelerate that trend. There's also a benefit to increasing financial inclusion and security. Having a digital dollar is arguably safer than walking around with hundreds of dollars, $100 bills in your wallet. And we shouldn't also forget that there's about 5 to 10% of the American population that currently lacks a bank account. But with the digital currency, if they just had access to even a public Wi-Fi and a phone, they could create a digital wallet and get access to the full suite of financial services that so many of us take for granted. A CBDC might also improve the efficacy of central bank monetary policy. So right now, the way the Federal Reserve impacts the overall economy is through a very circuitous and indirect process. What they do is they change the federal funds rate, but the manner in which they do it is they first engage in something primarily that's called open market operations. By buying and selling bonds from banks and dealers, that impacts the level of excess reserves in the banking system. That helps to set the federal funds rate. That rate is used as the benchmark for 10-year note and 30-year note yields. And those yields are what are used to price your 30-year fixed rate mortgage, your ARMs, your home equity line of credits, your personal loans. So you can see that there's a very circuitous process by which the interest rate changes flow through to the broader economy. But with the CBDC, they could potentially shortcut that entire process entirely. So let's say you were in a recessionary period. The Fed wanted to increase liquidity. You go to bed one night with $1 in your wallet. You wake up the next morning, maybe you have $1.05. Or you could think about it in the opposite scenario. If there was a period of inflation, you wake up with less. And so you can see the utility of that to a central banker. And then finally, proponents of a CBDC would suggest that this would help the government root out waste, fraud, and abuse, because it would be publicized. So what are the drawbacks, right? Well, obviously, anytime you take something that's physical and you put it online, you're subjecting yourself to cybersecurity risks and hacking. But the far more important threat is to our privacy. Because with a CBDC, all of our transactions would be logged on a publicly managed and available blockchain. That means that the government wouldn't just have the ability to view those transactions, they would also have the ability to potentially throttle and block them entirely. And admittedly, there's probably a set of transactions that we would all collectively agree should be blocked. Underage access to drugs and alcohol and other criminal activity, for instance. But what about more gray areas? Activities that would challenge the legitimacy of the existing regime, whatever political party that might be. That could be political donations, that could be cultural acts, that could be acts of health and bodily autonomy. And you don't really have to think that hard about examples because they already exist in the world around us. If you think back a couple years ago to the height of the COVID paranoia, to our friends to the north, the brave truckers in Canada that stood up to the unjust vaccine mandate perpetuated by that country's government. What happened? People set up GoFundMe accounts for their benefit. GoFundMe locked those accounts and liquidated the funds. The Canadian government was also able to block incoming Bitcoin transfers to their digital wallets. Here in the United States, liberals, particularly at the New York Times and CNBC, for years have been haranguing the credit card companies to set up special codes to track gun sales, purchases, and transactions. Why? Because with that record, it would be easier for the government or media companies to subpoena them and to create a de facto registry. Thus far, those efforts have been unsuccessful, but with a CBDC, they wouldn't just be successful, they would come with the full faith and credit and backing of the United States government. And that would inevitably lead to a social credit system. A social credit system is whenever there is an institution that ranks or prioritizes its members based on how closely they hew to the governing orthodoxy. That's right. So let's say you use the right pronouns. You donate to a pro-abortion group, or you donate to a bailout fund for BLM and Antifa rioters, like the current Vice President of the United States, who's currently running for president, who's going to be on TV in about an hour. Then maybe you get better terms on your FHA or VA loan. Or maybe you take the opposite perspective and you donate to a pro-free speech group on college campuses, which is so sorely needed. You donate to your local religious institution, your temple, your mosque, your synagogue, your church. then maybe you get branded as a bigot and you get less valuable terms on your less financing round. I'm speaking to a True Texas Project group. If other media companies were here, they'd probably say that this sounds like a right-wing fever dream.
Yeah.
I can assure you that it's not. Like you said, it's already happening in China. They already operate a sophisticated social credit system based on their surveillance dragnet.
It's already happening.
And you might be tempted to dismiss it and say, oh, this can only happen in a communist country where they develop viruses in laboratories and release them on the rest of the world. Well, what about our closest historic ally across the pond in the United Kingdom, where in 2023, one of the largest private banks booted Nigel Farage as one of their customers because he, quote, posed a reputational hazard to the bank because of his pro-Brexit, pro-conservative views. I'm sure all of you know who Nigel Farage is. He's been an outspoken conservative on British and American TV shows. I'm not worried about him. He's got good connections. I'm sure he already has found a new banking relationship. But what about the person who lacks his level of notoriety, who shares the same political viewpoints, but doesn't have the means to be able to find an alternative? Those are the people for whom we should be worried about, because it won't just be individual transactions that are blocked. It will be wholesale groups of people that are systematically debanked, deplatformed, and demonetized, rendered unable to participate in the basic aspects of life.
Sell Mike, hello.
If you think today, probably all of you in this room, if you open up your phone, you probably have your location services on by default. That means anytime you open up an app, that location data is being harvested, it's being sold to third-party data brokers, sell it to advertisers, use it to sell you and display on Facebook, Instagram, any social media, even within your Gmail account, targeted, personalized ads, sometimes for your benefit, sometimes to your nuisance, right? But you can talk to any sophisticated marketer. They'll tell you that with just as little as 2 pieces of daily location data, they can target data and advertisements with a high degree of relevance to you. Now imagine that it wasn't just the phone company, a third-party data broker, but it was the US government. And it wasn't just location data, it was transaction-level data. They would have everything they need to know about your life, your marriage, your kids, your education, your health, every detail of your life down to the color of your underwear will be at the fingertips of some pin-headed bureaucrat sitting in some cubicle in Northern Virginia, Maryland, or Washington, D.C. And that is too much information to give to any one person, much less the government. We have way too many examples, even in recent history, of the government abusing that trust. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when they will abuse it. You have the IRS targeting conservative organizations, trying to remove their tax-exempt status. You have the FBI falsifying FISA warrant applications to spy on opposition political campaigns. You have the FBI labeling Catholics as white supremacists. You have the DOJ going after concerned parents at school board meetings, labeling them as right-wing terrorists. It will be militarized and manipulated. So we have to stop it. A CBDC is the literal definition of a solution in search of a problem, and it calls out for a legislative solution. In Texas, we need to pass a law to prohibit its adoption, uptake, and acceptance. Florida has already passed such a law. We should do the same thing. This is election season. People are asking for our votes in 60 days to go to Austin or go to D.C. How about we ask them to actually focus now on implementing conservative priorities like mandatory E-Verify, ending the wasteful subsidies for weather-dependent, unreliable source of power like wind and solar and school choice, and instead of wasting time on petty personal politics and impeachment efforts that only serve to divide us when we need to be united. At the federal level, Senator Cruz has proposed legislation to ban the adoption of a CBDC. Predictably, Democrats in the Senate have blocked that. The next administration, that needs to be an absolute priority and passed. If you look, you won't be surprised that if you see a number of international and quasi-governmental organizations, they're generally in favor of a CBDC, the World Economic Forum and others. It's not difficult to perceive why, right? Because this would give them finally what they've been seeking, which is an ability to finally exert control to bend our actions towards their preferred objectives. And so our society, it needs reform. But a CBDC, that's not the answer for it. It requires reform of our political system. We need to pass a balanced budget. We need to reform the Federal Reserve. It should be subjected to regular audits. Ron Paul was prescient in calling for that years ago. We should end the dual mandate. The Federal Reserve should only be focused on maintaining price level stability, not on tertiary objectives like employment, diversity, the climate, and other nonsense. This is a political season again. There's going to be enormous pressure on the Federal Reserve coming up this month, in fact, for them to artificially begin cutting interest rates, even though the overall level of inflation in the country has not yet reached a long-term target of 2%. We're still well above at around 3 to 4%. And the best way, though, to remove this politicization from the process, even the impression of politicization, is to remove the human discretion element entirely. The federal funds rate should just be based on an equation. It should be 2% plus the level of inflation. That's it. That's the Taylor rule. You set it and forget it. That way it would provide stability to our money supply and to our investments. And so when it comes to investing in private cryptocurrencies and whether you believe in them or not, that's totally a private choice. But CBDCs are a category level different entirely. The only reason to adopt them would be to adopt a top to bottom cram down of societal change. And that is not what our founders fought for. That is not what our ancestors fought for 250 years plus. They fought for our freedom. They fought for our freedom to be able to freely discuss and engage with one another without fearing persecution for those ideas. We owe an obligation to them, to our fellow countrymen today, and to future generations, to our kids, to ensure that they receive the same blessings of liberty that we have. That means that whenever there is a challenge to those foundational values, whether it be in the form of a CBDC, a threat to our fundamental right of self-defense, equal protection, due process of law, freedom of speech, that we stand in the breach and say, no, we're not going to allow that on our watch. That's the time for our calling. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
I'm supposed to ask you the question to get it rolling, or I'll get fired.
Yeah.
What is the one takeaway you would like us to get from this? And this was awesome, by the way, and I have questions later. But what is the one takeaway that you would like for us all to get from your talk tonight?
I think the most important thing is to just be aware of the circumstances that are happening around us. Technology is a very beautiful thing. It's improved all of our lives. The average human lifespan has doubled over the course of the last century. And there are productive uses for technology as well, including private cryptocurrencies. The danger is when we give to the government something that might seem initially as a positive, to be aware of what the consequences will be down the line. And for us, to all of us across the political aisle, to be engaged and think about the ways in which these tools can be misused against us in the future. And even if we were in power, and I say we as a Republican or conservatives are in power, I wouldn't trust someone, because we're still a government, of men. We're not of gods. And so we all have to be wary of that. Our founding fathers specifically set up our system of government with the system of checks and balances because they knew men are not angels. And so the best way to preserve our freedom is to ensure that we actually understand what's going on in the society around us and be aware of it.
Thank you very much. Now, go.
Okay. I've got somebody's trying to get me to buy Bitcoin. Is that part of that? Yeah.
That's a private cryptocurrency. That's not a government-run alternative.
But I mean, that they could the government get their fingers in that pot?
The way it's set up, they should not be able to.
Just like
Should.
you can't get the anonymous servers in Finland. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
Would you buy it?
I own it, so I have to be transparent. Yeah, I do own it. Yeah.
Well, that's a little personal, but you can say I don't want to answer. But what percentage of your investments are in these?
Oh, it's small.
A small.
Yeah.
Well, Bitcoin's 60 grand a coin. You buy old coins.
60
You can
I
buy.
don't know where this man thinks I have.
You can buy.
You can buy one.
Oh,
Yeah, you can buy portions of it.
I have hundreds of thousands of dollars.
okay.
That's my wife. She's smarter than me.
What do you think about Texas having its gold bullion depository and having that as a currency for Texas, as a gold-backed currency in Texas?
I think that it would probably be unconstitutional for us to have our own currency. It would interfere with interstate commerce. We wouldn't be able to.
Gold and silver. It's in the Constitution.
In the Texas Constitution.
Yeah.
Yes, but not. I mean, it would interfere with interstate commerce at the national level, is what I mean.
What if we only used it in Texas?
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way that the current Commerce Clause is interpreted, I still think that that would likely be subject to a constitutional challenge at the national level. I also think the best way to fight against this idea is not to create our own form of currency and to say we're just going to protect ourselves by using our gold and silver bullion-backed currency. You know, what is Florida going to do next? What is Arkansas? How are we going to make sure that we're able to buy and sell goods from vendors in other states? Are we going to have a set exchange rate? That's going to require another enormous bureaucracy that is set up to determine those pegs and valuations. We have a great system right now. The dollar is the world's reserve currency. Let's keep it that way. Let's stop militarizing the use of the dollar on international, trying to use it against other countries with which we disagree, so that we encourage them to use another form of currency. Let's protect what we have and let's move forward with that.
I don't know that our currency is going to be considered for number one for long with us dropping the Arab states.
Yeah, the petrodollar.
We've lost the petrodollar, and I don't know how long we're going to maintain our stature in the
Dominance.
world, because I think we've lost so much stature in the world, and now with the dollar, and
Yeah.
now with Biden and them coming in and spending all this money and sending us into economic differences and sending all of our military hardware away from us. And
Giving it to the
we don't
Taliban?
have the surplus anymore. Yeah,
Yeah.
so we don't. I think that we are in a position to lose.
No, you're raising an excellent point, which is that we shouldn't take for granted our position as a global hegemon. All our actions are interpreted by both our allies and our foes, depending on their own personal interests. That's something that we seem to have lost. Our enemies, we might disagree with them, but they have a point of view. In order to understand and defeat them, we have to empathize with the view in order to understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish. Countries like Brazil and Russia and India and China and South Africa, when they set up these BRICS nations, they want to protect their own economic interests as well. And when you prevent countries from transacting in the dollar, you make it more difficult for them to do. You start weaponizing our involvement, our currency in other conflicts that don't have a relation to us. You're only encouraging them to look for alternatives. So for instance, China is looking to use the yuan in more multilateral currency exchanges rather than using the dollar. You're incentivizing countries in the Middle East to take their most valuable resource. The reason we have thousands of troops in the Gulf states is to protect that resource, even though the United States has larger natural gas reserves than any other country on earth, but this administration doesn't believe in exploiting them. The reason that we send these troops overseas is to protect that. We lose a lot if those Middle Eastern countries start pricing barrels of oil in the yuan or in some other type of currency. We need to protect our role as the global hegemon and the world reserve currency. And the reason is very simple. It has a very direct economic impact on the lives of everyday Americans. The fact that the US dollar is used to price these important global commodities means that there is a unlimited, virtually, demand for US assets at all times. That means that yen, yuan, other current euros flow into the United States to buy up dollar-denominated assets, including our government bonds. That keeps interest rates low in the United States. If they stop buying, if they stop the demand for the dollar, interest rates across our economy will start to go up overall and will hurt the average American consumer. We have a vested domestic and international interest to ensure that we're engaging in smart fiscal and monetary policy and that we're using our dollar hegemony wisely and not wasting it where it doesn't need to be. So it's an excellent point, and it raises a potential risk down the line.
You mentioned that Florida had already banned a digital dollar, and Texas should follow. What would that actually accomplish this is a federal level.
It's really just a statement of values, to be perfectly honest. I mean, there's a lot of performative legislation that is performed anyways, but this would be a statement that the state of Texas would not accept a digital dollar. Now, if you're asking the second question, which is if there are 60 folks in Congress, in the Senate that vote to pass this, and they want to cram it down, what can we really do? We'd probably have to file a lawsuit.
Okay.
But if we have a whole bunch of states do the same thing,
Right.
the
Sends a
federal government
message.
would
Yes.
hopefully say, hey, we better not even try because
That's
those-
right.
China has the two currency, I don't know what to call it, economy.
Yeah, they got the onshore and the offshore, yeah.
They have UN and renminbi,
Yeah.
why can't the US adopt that sort of internal and external currency approach to try to resolve these international, foreign policy issues?
Yeah, I mean, so part of it, yeah, so that's one reason. The second reason is that the Chinese central bank is much more engaged with setting a peg.
Ours is not far behind.
That's right, but they are certainly, it's an order of magnitude difference between how involved our central bank is with buying and selling dollars on international markets versus the Chinese central bank. They have expressly said that they won't allow the yuan to go below or above 6.5, 7. They peg it. So they are actively engaged with managing that peg, and they're public about it.
Oh, yeah.
Our central bank doesn't openly say because everyone wants to peg to us. So they're pegging to us because they want to undercut American jobs by making the yuan artificially cheap so they can dump their cheap plastic crap in our country, rather than allowing for the development of our manufacturing here.
And they're in worse economic condition than we are.
Oh, absolutely. They have already passed a demographic boom. Their country is going to be significantly older.
We're 5 or 10 years behind the rest as far as, and they've probably taken us far, this administration has taken us far closer to the same way. I mean, we're paying, we've got camps that have worker, and we're paying for all these people to come in our country.
Yeah.
I mean, so we're not far behind. We're like 5 to 10 years from what I understand behind the rest. Like England is now hitting really bad. And Europe is in bad shape too. Everywhere is in bad shape. But the border issues and the economic issues have been they're just a little bit longer than they have just started to make them bloom here.
Sure.
And so, what do you think the remedy is?
I mean, that's you raised a lot of issues there. The number one, the most important issue is the border. And not just for monetary policy, but just overall a semblance of the rule of law.
Right.
You know, I'm a first-generation American. My parents immigrated to this country legally in the 1980s. My mom had to wait for 6 months after my parents got married because she followed the right path to come to this country. They worked hard. They sacrificed so that I could go to good school, so that I could have a good education and become what I am, and I will do everything I can for my kids. But they did it the right way. And that's because this country is a shining city on a hill. There are millions of people that would gladly give up everything they have for a day to live a day in this country. Why are we opening up the border to people who have shown absolute disregard to our rule of law? It's not just harmful to our country, it's not just harmful to American citizens by depressing the wages of working class folks, of driving up the cost of lower income and middle class housing by people who are here illegally. It's also corroding the system of legal immigration into this country. It is a total affront to the rule of law, and it's an economic drag. I don't care what Goldman Sachs says, that these people are paying taxes in this country. Believe me, everyone in this room, if we were in Venezuela, we would try to come to this country too. I do not blame them for the plights that they have. I blame us for letting them in under the conditions that we do. You are entitled to determine who comes into your country and under what circumstances. We have every right to do that. That is not racist, that is not bigoted, that is having the rule of law in this country. That is number one. You don't see many Americans trying to sneak across the border into China, but you do see tens of thousands of Chinese citizens and nationals trying to come into our country. You want to come in the door, come through the front, not through the back.
Yeah.
So that's,
Climb the wall, go through the door.
that's right.
Well, it's clear there's something else going on. There's somebody getting benefit that we're not accounting for.
I think that one of the...
Besides the cartels.
I think that one of the
Someone else.
large unstated reasons for why the Biden administration, particularly early on, opened up the floodgates, and they weren't particularly hidden about it. I mean, on day one, he implemented like 16 executive orders to overturn Title 42, relieve and lower the asylum standard hearings. By the way, we should also note that these aren't people fleeing persecution on the basis of a protected class. They're economic migrants. And again, no one, we don't,
No blame on.
yeah,
They're
no.
out of their prisons. They're sending people out of their
If you were in their position, you would come here too.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is that when they passed these trillion-dollar spending programs, it triggered huge levels of inflation, 9, 10%. What is one of the best ways to tamp down on inflation? Is to help keep wage pressure down. One of the great benefits of having a large, unskilled, illegal population in the country is that it helps to keep wage pressure down amongst the working class, and that's what you've seen. Whether on the books or not, in fact, according to Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, one of the reasons why wage inflation hasn't kept up with the overall level of inflation is specifically because of this fact, that you have a large supply of workers competing for the same jobs has helped to keep it down. So I actually think that it wasn't just, yes, the number one goal is they believe that they will be new voters for the Democratic Party, 100%. The only thing I would say is that they should be aware of what they're wishing for, right? 15 to 20 years ago, Rui Teixeira wrote a very important book. It was called The Emerging Majority. He talked about how the demographic diversity of the country would endlessly benefit Democrats. Well, lo and behold, look, 20 years later, Texas, we now get 50% of the Hispanic vote. We get close, upwards of 40% of the Asian vote in this state. And Donald Trump is probably going to get over 40% of both the Hispanic and Asian group, and he's going to get a significant component of the black vote as well. So these are not linear patterns. Things don't last forever. So beware what you wish for on that first one. That doesn't justify anything. But the second part is, I think that they also believe it benefited the economy by helping to provide a large pool of labor that would tamp down inflation. And it's, as twisted as that is, this is what they believe. They don't want what's in the best interest of the American people. And that's what we need to be focused on. It's not just the tools and technology that are being developed. It's who's looking out for the best interests of the working class, of average, everyday Americans, and for the values that this country was founded on. It's not just the last dollar. It's about believing in the foundational principles that we were created on.
Alienating the people that come here illegally too. I mean, if I
They
came
gave me
here,
$30,000
like your
to buy a
family,
house.
went through the process,
Yeah.
and then they opened the gates for everybody else.
You won't find people who are more opposed to illegal immigration than people who are waiting in line
Yeah.
and do it the right way.
Those who went through it legally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And spent the process, thousands of dollars, years in line to wait.
I don't know, I think what's been going on in America has been going on for a long time. We've moved away little by little from our Constitution. One of the big ones was a Republican when Bush put through the Patriot Act. That took away many of our freedoms that people didn't realize. And so what I...
Well, Dick Cheney's come full circle, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned the World Economic Forum, the UN, any of those. I think that they've been moving us along for a good 100 years toward getting us in. You can read a book, the Communist Manifesto. There's 17 things that they thought they needed to accomplish to move the United States into being socialists or whatever. They've accomplished all of them. The destruction of the family,
Yep.
you know, all these things have deteriorated our country at this point. And the problem is a lot of times, like, and I'm saying this about myself too, the young families, they're busy making money, feeding their kids, you know, going to baseball games and everything. I did the same thing, and I didn't see it happening. And the problem is so many times that's the way it is in our society, is it's the older people that then have time to go, whoa, what is going on, you know? And so...
Lucky there's a lot of us, so we could move the needle.
Yeah, so how to change that and to start getting things to going back to what our Constitution and in that, and especially with all these people coming in, then we kind of lost control.
Yeah, not kind of.
A lot.
Totally.
So with you know, I mean, the EU, the UK, India, Russia, and China, either having adopted or in the process of adopting some form of central bank digital currency, I think one thing that a lot of people should consider, and there was a show, an episode of Black Mirror called Nosedive, and it shows the social credit score in action, and the entire episode is dedicated to it. And if nobody's seen it, I think it's on Netflix or something. You can take a look. It's Black Mirror is the show, and Nosedive is the episode, and it shows how if you give the government control, they control every aspect of your life.
Where you
the
live.
car you drive, where you live, the school you attend,
you know, the type of job you can have, everything. And China's taken it to, you know, in some of their areas, they have the 15-minute cities.
Right?
We already have some in the United States.
Right, well, but they use facial recognition at the entry points where if you don't, you know, if you don't have the right score,
Yeah.
you can't even open the gates to get in, and if that's where you work, you can't go to work now.
Right?
So, I mean, we really need to, what you're talking about tonight is extremely important, and it's something that people really need to take a serious look at, because if we don't put a stop to it and it gets enacted, it'll change all of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Then you better know what you
Yeah.
believe.
It's called nosedive.
No.
So I come across someone who is pro
Yeah.
central currency. What are their talking points gonna be, a couple of them, main ones, and how do I refute them?
That's
Would you
good.
say?
What were the main talking points they had?
Yeah, for someone like my
How they try to sell
30-year-old
it.
liberal niece,
Ah.
whatever she watches, whatever she gets her information, she's gonna argue to me why it's good, and I'm a terrible arguer, so I'm looking for you how I would refute her main arguments.
Yeah, I think that the first is obviously the easiest one, which is a threat of kind of cyber issues, privacy related. But the biggest one is a threat to who do you really want access to your most intimate details, what you're purchasing.
What is she gonna say? It's great because of this and this, and how do I say, no, it's not, because of that and that?
Because of the
That's my
privacy.
question.
Yeah, so she's going to say it's great because it helps people have access to currency on their phone, right? Or they have a digital wallet and they'll be able to pay for everything.
Don't have to worry about running to the bank. and-
Right, well, we have a system for that. We already have private credit cards and debit cards, right?
Very great reason.
Yeah.
So the answer is, so why would you want the government to be in charge of being the sole disseminator of that currency? Have them the ability to see and monitor every single one of your transactions. It's one thing for it to be managed by multiple banks. That's bad enough, but we have to do with what we have to do in order to survive. But having one central player involved in that would lead to endless ability for monitoring and potential blocking. If she's a liberal, for example, would she appreciate it if there was a strongly pro-life president who came into office and said, you can't use the dollars to pay for abortions anymore, or you're not able to pay for contraception? I'm not suggesting that they should,
Yeah.
but would that be something that she feels comfortable with? Would she be comfortable with a conservative or a Republican coming into office and saying, well, if you're a business owner, now you get an extra 10% in your digital wallets because you are the job creators, the entrepreneurs in our country? Is that something that she feels comfortable with? Would she say that if you're an illegal immigrant into the country, that we're going to take away all of your money? Is that something she would feel comfortable with? She might support those ideas, but if she should think about it from the perspective of what if she was not in the position of maintaining the lever of power?
Yeah.
We always think in short-term stages, like what if we get into power and do something? The problem is, if you implement something, that means the other side can use it too.
Yeah.
Right? So the Democrats have engaged in the game of we're going to impeach your president on the basis of a phone call with a foreign leader.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Well, apparently Republicans don't have the balls to do it yet, but they should have already impeached Joe Biden. His son is openly admitted to corruption with foreign leaders. We're just going to set the game going back and forth, and eventually we're going to reach a mutually assured destruction and say, okay, we've gone too far. Let's take a step back. Let's take a deep breather. But until that point, each time there's only an escalation. So that's probably the best argumentative point. It's like, well, that's great if you're in charge, but what if you're in charge of using the CBDC?
Is there any way they could argue that it basically makes them richer, or they can control inflation better, so my spending power is better with this, or is there any monetary argument that the currency would theoretically benefit a person? I don't know if there is, I'm just wondering.
Well, nobody can steal your money. No one can counterfeit
Except for the
money.
government.
Hang on.
Only the government
Hang
can
on,
steal your money.
hang on. What I'm saying is that I don't call them liberals. They're anything but liberal. But the leftists, what they're gonna say is, you can't counterfeit digital currency. No one can steal your digital currency because the government can always track it down and get it back for you. That nobody can use digital currency on hard drugs and
Sure.
stuff like that. They can control the bad things that might happen. That's what their argument
And I
is
think
gonna
with
be.
any argument, it's always important to concede if there are positives to the other side. Those are all, and I think I mentioned them in my talk, like those are true statements. But the question is a balance. Against the benefits that could exist, what are the costs and which one over the long term would be significantly worse for us, for individuals and for the country as a whole. And I think on that realm, the equation is pretty clear and self-evident, but that requires a degree of communication and convincing people, because unfortunately, as we saw in this country, I was very upset and disappointed that people were so willing to give up their liberties like that during the COVID paranoia.
Yeah.
How many people we talk to our children that this country is founded on the concept of freedom, that we fought against government tyranny, and now you're not allowed to go to your school,
Yep.
you're not allowed to go to your church, you close your businesses the way you're supposed to do your business, you close public beaches, you had places in California that put blue tape around skate parks so kids couldn't go to public playgrounds, and we tolerated this? This country accepted that? There are people, not just in our state, but across the country that accepted that state of affairs for a period of weeks, months, years? What does that really say about us? Have we really passed forth and passed down the values that this country was founded on, or do we have a significant amount of work to do?
To give up their liberty, they're willing to take away liberty from people. That's the part
And
that's
turn
really
Yeah.
the
scary.
neighbors in.
They're the
Some
guys
still wearing
who are
masks.
behind the switchboard that has all the switches, that they'll shock you because they can. That scares me more than the people who are saying, it's just a little bit of liberty, who give up their liberty.
Yeah.
It's the ones who are willing to take.
Yeah, and active participants in it, right?
Yes.
The candidate for vice president in Minnesota set up a tip line, said neighbors would rat on one another if they didn't have their mask high enough off on their face. This is the type of society that we're supposed to talk. So there's a lot of work. It's going to take a long time. We've got a lot. We're playing behind the 50-yard line, but we stand on the side of righteousness. And on the values of this country have lasted for hundreds of years. They will, God willing, last for hundreds of years more, but it's going to take all of our collective effort to do it.
Amen.
I want to ask you a question, because I love your passion and I love your perspective. I've had an opportunity, and I want to preface it by a conversation I had with two of our congressmen. And I said, when I look at the border issue, the police crime issue, all the things that the left is promulgating, I said, it causes me to be fearful for my children and my grandchildren. And how can a Democrat, how can a liberal, how can a leftist look at all this stuff and not be fearful for their own family and their own children? And both of them said the same thing. They said they have been radicalized so much, and they've been fed so much that they really don't care anymore about that. They're so focused on their agenda. I grew up appreciating I've been a Republican since before I was born. But I grew up respecting the two-party system and saying that's a good thing. Do you think we can ever get back to trusting a two-party system? The chasm just seems so big, and the divide seems so large that, I just have such a distaste for those folks. I don't know that I can ever go back to appreciating. Do you understand where I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where I'm coming from?
I think the perception of differences between us is metastasized because that's what sells clicks. That's what the media wants us to believe, that we're so terribly divided that this country would never be able to unite. But then you ask people, can boys become girls? Should they compete in the same sports or change in the same locker rooms? That's not a 50-50 issue. That's an issue that most working class Democrats would agree with most Republicans on, but it is a vocal minority that sets that as the huge difference in the country. Talk about people, do you believe in God, family, and country? You talk to average people, not the partisan hacks that are on TV. Those are issues that unite most of us. Most of us are God-fearing people in this country. Yes, there's going to be a minority who disagree and think that they are the abolition of everything. But that's not the majority of people in this country. Let's focus on what unites us rather than what divides us. This is a passing period in American history. There have been periods where we've literally fought wars against other people within our own country. Hundreds of thousands of Americans, Confederates, Union soldiers died because we were that at odds with one another. We passed through that 150 years ago. There was a time in this country less than 60 years ago where based on the color of your skin, I couldn't be in this room. You wouldn't be able to drink water from the same areas. That's how divided we've been, and yet we've still persevered. And it's because of the founding ideals of this country, a belief in due process, equal protection, the impartial application of justice, freedom of speech, that we eventually reached truth and consensus. Those are the values that unite this country, a belief in God, family, and country, in that order, that unite us, that can continue to move us forward. So I would say that we shouldn't lose the faith. That absolutely, I'm just as concerned, for the sake and future of my kids as well. That's why I'm here. That's why, we all have to do the work that we're doing. But the best days of this country, I firmly believe, are not behind us. I think they're still ahead of us. And that's the only way that you can have a positive outlook and make sure that we're continuing to work to bring that about.
I have a question. You say there are people out there who are on our side on these reasonable, rational things, like keeping men out of boys out of girls' locker rooms, and maybe even the gender change in business. Are they passionate enough about that they will actually vote for the Republican Party?
Absolutely. I think so.
We have to be talking to our neighbors and all of those
Do you
people,
think,
though.
I mean,
We have
they
to get them off
agree
their
with us on
couches.
these common sense issues, but are they gonna still vote for the other team?
Yes.
They are?
Many will, many might, and many will stay with where they are because they might value another issue more importantly to them, abortion, for example. That might be more important in the value chain for them.
Okay, thank you.
We just gotta make sure everybody who thinks like us gets to the polls.
That's
And
right.
that's on each and every one of us.
I did an experiment. We went on a cruise like a year and a half ago. And I just started talking to people about, and I was actually very, very encouraged because most everybody I talked to agreed, with the same worldview of like, boys are boys, girls are girls, all this stuff that's going on. I mean, there's so many issues right now. And it's just that there's an elite group and they use businesses to make something happen here during COVID, and which is really fascist if you think about it. And so, but it's that group up there. It's not, like he is saying, it's not all the people. Yeah, some people are gonna, but they don't, a lot of them are uninformed too.
Oh, that's true.
Misinformed.
We got it.
Disinformed.
We really appreciate you.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
So much.
I apologize for the very poor introduction. I was throwing a curveball about 30 minutes before you got here. So.
Well, you guys have hellacious traffic on the way here.
We
so-
do.
Yes.
Every
Yeah,
year.
it's-
You're
yeah.
seeing that
And the good
every
news, it's going to get worse.
year.
Yeah.
It's something.
Unless we fix some of our city councils.
This
Yeah.
it's no big deal, but I'd like to give you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
You're an awesome speaker.
Do you have a website?
No, but I would encourage you all to get in contact with me. I can. My name is on social media. It's at Sanjay Narayan, SanjayNarayan. My email address is sanjaynarayan09@gmail.com, and I would love to stay in touch with you guys.
Okay, well, that's on recording, isn't it? That being recorded? We can
Yes.
go
Do
back.
you have a business card?
Yeah, I do.
I'll get it out.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
This is
Okay.
it'll.
Sure
You could, yes, this is my work email. So let me write on the personal email. I'll send it to you.
I'm sure Julie or Susan. has-
Julie has all my information too. yeah.
Okay, never mind.
If you give me your information, I can post it on our walk wall page.
Oh yeah. So our Facebook.
Yes.
Yeah. So Sanjay.